Welcome to Tales from Sector 9, your portal to immersive sci-fi audio stories. If you enjoy deep space action, rogue AIs, and conspiracy theories, you're in the right place. Tap like and subscribe to keep the adventures coming. Drop a comment and tell us where in the galaxy you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare for tonight's story. The Ghost Battalion. Major Owen Kearney arrived in 1944 with a dead navigation system, a German patrol 200 yards away, and 6 hours to stop a physicist from saving D-Day. He lay flat in wet grass beneath a hedgerow that had stood since Napoleon, and he did not move. Water beaded on the composite plates of his chest rig. Behind his left ear, a piece of ceramic that had cost more than a car in his own century whispered that it could see no satellites, no cellular relays, no beacons, no timing pulses. Its silence was the loudest thing he had heard in years. On the road, 2 German voices spoke low, the tone of men who did not think anyone was listening. Boots scraped gravel. A boot crunched grass. They were coming off the road into the field. Owen breathed out slowly and did what he had trained his life to do, which was to become part of the ground until the ground decided otherwise. The other members of his team announced themselves without sound. From one hedgerow east came a breath in a pattern that was not natural, twice quick, once long. Petrov. Owen answered. Farther back in the field, Reed's slower breath repeated it. Laurent, silent for a beat, made a dry click of tongue that meant I hear you, and there is a problem. The German voices had stopped moving. 600 metres west, then north across 2 fields, and the farm complex should rise out of the grass with its stone barn, its slate roof, its well, its collapsed shed. The farm above which, a century from now, other men would pour concrete and hang fluorescent lights and forget any of this had ever been here, except a piece of it always had been. Bewegung, a German said quietly. Owen slid his hand along the wet stock of the weapon at his side. Suppressed, subsonic. By the standards of the men on the road, it was witchcraft. He did not want to use it. Every piece of foreign matter he left in this century was another thread the future could tug on until something unravelled. The Germans went back to the road. Their laughter thinned. Owen let out breath. Laurent found him first, out of the hedge in a way that suggested the hedge had grown around him, and then reluctantly let him go. Smaller than Owen, he moved like a man who had spent considerable time deciding where his weight ought to fall. His face was streaked with earth. Only his pale eyes betrayed him as anything not belonging to the field. 2 of them, Laurent breathed, rifles slung, bored, came off the road because one of them wants to piss. How close? Close enough. Major, we cannot stay in this hedge. I know. Petrov joined them, then Reed, who arrived last because he was the tallest and least gifted at disappearing. Reed's face beneath the blackening was young. Petrov's had no expression at all. The face of a man who had already decided what he would do and was waiting for the world to catch up. They gathered under the hedge close enough that a whisper carried and no farther. Rain drummed the ceramic of their helmets. Position, Owen said. 600 short, 40 degrees off. Petrov had a folded display cupped in one gloved hand, its light barely a suggestion. Farm's that way. A tilt of his chin. There's a Kraut half-track parked outside the barn. Reed closed his eyes. The one in the historical file, Owen asked. That's the thing, sir. File doesn't have a half-track at that farm tonight. File has an old man, 3 cows and a daughter. Laurent looked at Owen. In the dark, only the pale eyes were visible. So it starts already, Laurent said. How long since Armand crossed? 11 hours, 40, Petrov said. Give or take. And the window? 6 hours to collapse, dawn on the 6th. Then we don't waste any of them arguing about half-tracks. Petrov, farm, Callum, barn, Laurent, road. I'll take the house. We look, we do not touch. We leave nothing. If there's a half-track outside that barn that shouldn't be there, I want to know why before I decide what to do about it." "And if Armand is in the house?" Laurent asked. "Then we have a quiet conversation. And if he is not?" Owen didn't answer. He was already moving. He crossed 3 hedged fields in silence. In the third he passed within 20 metres of a cow, which raised its head and chewed at him with the calm of a creature that has seen worse things than men. At the 4th hedge he went to his belly and inched up until he could see the courtyard. The farm sat in its own hollow. Barn low and long slate roof black with rain. House 2 stories, 1 window lit yellow behind a curtain. A well, a collapsed shed of black timbers he recognised from an archival photograph taken by an American war correspondent on June 12, 1944. In that photograph the shed had been standing, and there was the half-track. Angled across the courtyard, 1 wheel in a puddle, its long armoured snout pointed toward the barn. Engine cold. 2 men in field grey coats stood beside it under the eaves of the barn, smoking. One had his helmet off. His hair was very fair in the spill from the house window. Owen touched his throat. Farm confirmed. Half-track. 2 visible. House lit. No sign of Armand. Hold. 3 soft acknowledgements in his ear. He watched. 11 hours 40 minutes since Armand had stepped through. Long enough to walk here. Long enough to talk to whoever lived here. Long enough to walk to a village and telephone a garrison. Long enough for a half-track to grumble down these roads. The yellow window darkened. The 2 smokers straightened, ground their cigarettes under boot heels, and turned toward the house. A door creaked. An officer stepped out, a Hauptmann by the collar tabs, and behind him came a young woman, perhaps 24, dark hair wet. She was not weeping. She walked into the rain as though she had been walking into rain for years. The Hauptmann held her elbow, not roughly in the manner of a man escorting a difficult relative to dinner. She spoke to him. Her voice drifted across the courtyard, low and unhurried. Behind her, a second figure, older, hunched, in a nightshirt. The father. His hands were open at his sides as though he'd been told to keep them where they could be seen, and had lost the trick of doing anything else with them. "Laurent? I have them. Can you hear?" A pause. Then Laurent, in a voice so flat it was almost gentle. "The Hauptmann is asking who came to the house yesterday evening. She's telling him no one. He does not believe her. He's not shouting. He's a patient man. That is worse." Petrov. Barn. Empty, or there's someone very good in there. Hot patch on the wall about waist high. Body heat small. Cat or a child. Callum. Half-track. Cold engine. Antenna up. If they've been talking to anyone, they've been talking a while. Owen watched the Hauptmann tilt his head at something the young woman said. He watched the old man's hands tremble. He watched himself, inside himself, standing at a threshold he had crossed before and did not want to cross again. His orders were absolute. No witnesses, no artifacts, no unnecessary contact. Except that Armand had already reached in, had spent 11 hours 40 minutes reaching in with both hands. The Hauptmann said something short and cold. A smoker moved. He took the old man by the shoulder and turned him around to face the barn wall. The old man went where he was pushed. His hands stayed open at his sides. The Hauptmann drew his pistol. Owen's finger found the safety of the suppressed weapon. He did not move it. His heart did what it always did in these moments. Slowed, rather than sped, as though it too were listening. The Hauptmann did not shoot the old man. Instead, he held the pistol at his side and said something else, and the young woman answered without turning to look at her father. The old man's shoulders shook once and went still. "Threatening the father to make her talk," Laurent whispered. "She's not going to talk. Because she doesn't know. Because she knows too much." "Sir," Petrov said, softer than the rain. Hot patch inside the barn just moved. Person. Small. At the wall now. There's a gap in the boards. They're watching. Owen thought of a girl of 10, of 8, of 6, pressed to a barn wall watching her sister and her grandfather and holding her breath. He thought of a folder in a briefing room in 2049 with a name on it, and a photograph, and a date of death. He thought of Felix Armand, who had also thought of such folders and had made a choice about them, and was somewhere in this wet country making more. "Callum," he said. His voice had gone calm. "Can you kill the half-track's radio without killing the half-track?" "Give me 2 minutes. Laurent, if I do this, can you and Petrov take the smokers without noise?" "Yes." "Petrov?" "Yes." "Sir," Reed said in a voice that was not asking a question so much as offering a last exit, "we haven't been on the ground an hour." "I know. And this isn't Armand." "I know. And if we do this, we leave 3 bodies and a half-track in a courtyard that shouldn't have any." "I know." The Hauptmann raised the pistol a second time. This time it drifted casually toward the young woman. "Move," Owen said. He would remember it afterward as mechanical facts strung together by rain. Reed crawled under the belly of the half-track. Reed was a large man who moved like a much smaller one when he needed to. He worked the radio's antenna base with pliers wrapped in cloth so the metal would not sing, and he had it disconnected in 90 seconds. He did not come out from under the half-track for another 30, because the nearer smoker had turned his head at some sound and stood listening. Petrov took that smoker from the far hedge with a shot that sounded through the suppressor and the rain, like a man clearing his throat politely into his sleeve. The German folded forward against the barn wall as though he had leaned there to rest. His rifle did not fall, the sling caught on his elbow. Laurent took the second smoker in the same instant, from another angle, so the 2 sounds arrived as one sound, and there was, for a beat, no gap in the world for the Hauptmann to notice. The Hauptmann noticed on the second beat, because he was a patient man, and patient men are observant. His head began to turn. Owen shot the Hauptmann through the throat from the 4th hedge. The German officer's pistol dropped. The Hauptmann went to his knees in a puddle. He did not fall further. He knelt with his hands at his neck, blood black in the yellow spill from the house window, looking with genuine astonishment into the empty rain. The old man did not move. He had not been told to. The young woman turned. She saw the Hauptmann kneeling. She saw the 2 smokers slumped against the barn wall. She did the thing that had kept her alive this long, which was to close her mouth and wait. Owen was out of the hedge and across the field before the Hauptmann finished dying. Petrov went to the barn, Laurent to the road, watching for the rest of a patrol that had not come. Reed rolled out from under the half-track and rose, wiping oil off his palm on his trouser leg. The Hauptmann tipped forward at last and lay in the puddle with his cheek in the water. Owen reached the young woman and stopped 6 feet from her. He kept the weapon low. He did not raise his hands, because raising his hands to a woman standing that's still in a courtyard full of dead Germans would have been an insult to both of them. "Mademoiselle," he said quietly. She looked at him, not at his face, at his rig, at the shapes clipped to his chest, at the sight above his weapon, at the shape of his helmet, which was not the shape of any helmet made in 1944. Her eyes came back to his face, in careful, quiet English, in the accent of a young woman who'd been taught by an English governess before the war and had not spoken the language aloud in 5 years, she said. "He told us you would come." Owen felt rain on the back of his neck. "Who did?" he said, though he knew. "The Frenchman." She glanced toward the barn without moving her head. "The one who is not from here?" The old man lowered his hands and turned around. He looked at the Hauptmann in the puddle. He looked at the 2 smokers against the barn wall. He looked at Owen, and at Reed coming out from behind the half-track, and at Laurent stepping through the courtyard gate with rain running off his sleeves. He looked at his daughter. He said something in Norman French that Owen did not catch but did not need to. because it was the same thing men had said in fields for 1,000 years upon seeing a thing that could not be undone. "Petrov," Owen said. "Barn." Petrov's voice in his ear was careful. One person, female, young, 20s, armed, Sten. "She has not pointed it at me. She would like to speak to you." "Bring her out." "Major," Laurent said, and his voice was strange. "The Hauptmann." Owen looked. The dead man's coat had fallen open. Tucked into the inner pocket, held there by a button, was a folded piece of paper with a rubber-stamped eagle on the corner. Laurent knelt and drew it out with 2 fingers, careful of the blood. He read it in the yellow light from the doorway. His face, which had been composed for hours, did an involuntary thing. "What?" Owen said. "A movement order, dated this evening, signed by a Standartenführer in St. Lo. It orders the 21st Reconnaissance, element of an armoured division that I am not going to name aloud, in a courtyard to relocate from a position I have memorised to a position 11 kilometres inland of Omaha Beach." He looked up. "That division, in the history I learned, does not move at all until the afternoon of June 6th, after the landings. It moves the wrong way, and it moves too late, and thousands of men live because of it." He folded the paper along its original creases with the care one might use for a letter from a dead friend. "This order is dated 18 hours early." Owen looked past him, out into the dark where the road ran west toward a coast full of sleeping villages and empty beaches, and men in Portsmouth harbours climbing into landing craft in a future that had, until 11 hours 40 minutes ago, been fixed. Somewhere on the far side of a hedgerow he could not see, an engine started. Not a farm engine, heavier, lower. It was moving west, and it did not belong to any convoy in any file he'd ever read. From the barn doorway, a young woman with a sten across her back and mud on her boots stepped out into the rain and looked at Major Owen Kearney of a century that had not yet been born, and said, in the same careful English as the first, "My name is Madeleine. He said you would try to stop him. Please, do not try to stop him. He is right." The rain came down harder. Somewhere out in the black country, the engine changed gears and climbed a hill Owen had never seen on any map, and began, quite deliberately, to rewrite the world. They did not stay in the courtyard. Reed dragged the Hauptmann behind the barn while Laurent walked the 2 smokers, one under each arm as though escorting drunks home from a bar, into the collapsed shed, and laid them side by side in the wet timber. Petrov took a length of wire from a pocket of his rig and did quiet, methodical things to the half-track's ignition that would, in 10 minutes, make it look as though it had suffered a mechanical failure of the sort a 1944 mechanic might argue about for an hour before giving up. The old man watched all of this from his doorway, hand still open at his side, saying nothing. His daughter watched with him. Colette, the young woman with dark wet hair, who had put one arm around his shoulders. She did not look at the puddle where the Hauptmann had knelt. Madeleine Rousseau stood in the middle of the courtyard with her sten across her back and rain in her eyelashes, and waited for Owen to make a decision. "How many?" he said. "How many what, monsieur? How many people in your cell know a man came out of the ground yesterday morning?" She considered him. It was the calculation of someone deciding how much truth a stranger could carry without dropping it. 4, she said. 3 now. The Germans took Henri last night. They took Papa Vasseur this morning. Henri is dead. Papa Vasseur will be dead by tomorrow because he knows names and he's 71 and they will not be patient with him. She said it as though reciting weather. The 3 who remain are myself, my cousin Bertrand, and a boy of 15 named Leo, who should not be doing this work but does it anyway. And your Frenchman. He's not my Frenchman. He speaks like a Parisian who has read too many books. He is somebody's. Laurent, coming back from the shed, made a sound that might have been a laugh in a warmer century. "Where is he now?" Owen said. "Moving. He will not stay in one place more than a few hours. He said he learned that from what happened here." She glanced toward the shed. He was right, I think. Where was he going tonight? She looked at him for a long moment. Rain ran off the barrel of her Sten onto the cobbles. "Monsieur, I will take you to him, but I will not take you to him so that you can shoot him. If that is what you have come to do, please shoot me here, and then find him yourself, because he is a friend to us, and I will not lead his executioner to his door." "I did not come to shoot him." "You came to stop him?" "Yes. Those may be the same thing in the end." She nodded once, as though a question had been answered honestly, and she respected the honesty even where she didn't like it. "Then come, 1/2 an hour from here on foot. He will be there before we are." "We're not walking 1/2 an hour through this country in these uniforms." "No," she agreed, "you're not." She turned toward the house and said something short and gentle to Colette, who nodded and disappeared. Inside. A moment later, Colette came back with an armful of dark cloth, which she set down on the cobbles without looking at any of the men, and went back in. "My uncle was a large man," Madeleine said, "before the occupation." They cached the modern rigs in the cellar of the collapsed shed. Beneath a slab, the old man moved for them without being asked, wrapped in oilcloth and buried under a layer of turnips. Owen kept a pistol at the small of his back and a knife in his boot, and the display in an inside pocket. Petrov kept a compact receiver. Laurent kept nothing but the folded German order in his coat, close to his heart, as though it were the thing most likely to be searched for. They walked. Madeleine took them north first, then east, along a cart track between hedgerows so tall they blotted out the sky. Rain thinned. Somewhere out in the dark, apples were fermenting in a shed. A dog barked from a farmyard they could not see. Farther off, a truck laboured up a distant grade, gave up, reversed, tried again. "That one is theirs?" Owen asked. "Everything with an engine is theirs," Madeleine said. "Only bicycles are still ours." Laurent walked beside her for a while, speaking in low Norman French. Owen watched the set of her shoulders soften as she realised he could speak her country's language the way it was actually spoken. After a time she laughed, once, quietly, at something he said. It did more to settle Owen's chest than any of the tactical work of the last hour. He fell back and let Petrov come up beside him. "Signal." Petrov had the receiver cupped in one palm. "There's a lot of traffic tonight, sir. More than there should be. Encrypted stuff on the Wehrmacht divisional bands, plain Kriegsmarine chatter from the coast, and a Luftwaffe net that keeps flaring up and going quiet like somebody who can't decide whether to say something. Anything on that armoured recon element? Not by name, but somebody's moving vehicles. I can hear the acknowledgements. Someone's asking for road status on secondary routes west of St. Lo, and someone else is complaining that a bridge east of Trevière is out." Owen looked at him. "Callum," Reed came forward. "Sir, is that bridge supposed to be out tonight?" "No, sir." Reed did not need to consult anything. He had spent the flight in, if a transit through a temporal pathway could be called a flight, memorising every scheduled demolition on both sides of Overlord. That bridge is supposed to come down on the 9th by an American engineer platoon in daylight. So it's early, by 4 days. Who blew it? Man with a very good historical map. Owen watched the back of Madeleine's coat as she walked ahead of them. The world was coming loose at edges he had not known were edges. The farmhouse Madeleine led them to lay in a shallow fold of land 2 kilometres from anywhere, screened from the road by an orchard and from the sky by a stand of poplars, used by 4 cells over 3 years, raided twice, always rebuilt or reoccupied because, in her phrasing, Normans were stubborn about houses. A single lamp burned in the kitchen. The smell inside was of wood smoke and old bread and gun oil. 2 men waited at the kitchen table. One young, thin, sharp-faced with a bandaged hand. The other a heavy older peasant with a moustache like a wet broom, who looked at the newcomers, counted them, and returned to cleaning a revolver on the tabletop as though he had been expecting 9 and only 4 had arrived. At the far end of the table, with a dark object in front of him and a candle at his elbow, sat Dr. Felix Armand. He looked up. Thinner than the photograph Owen had studied. Greyer. Workman's coat and a knitted cap. His hands, resting flat on the wood on either side of the object, were the hands of a man who had not slept and did not particularly want to. The object was the tablet. It sat between a candle and a pistol and an open bottle of cider, and its dark glass reflected the candle flame without warmth. Its edge was a bright line of machining no lathe in 1944 could have produced. Owen looked at it and felt something in his chest in the same family as fear. It was the feeling a man gets when he sees his own house key on a stranger's ring. Major Kearney. Armand's English was quiet and precise, French melody underneath. "Please sit. There is cider. It is not very good, but it is what there is." "Dr. Armand, you have come to arrest me. I have come to bring you home." Armand smiled tiredly. Those are not, in this case, the same thing. Owen did not sit. Neither did his team. Laurent stood a pace behind Owen's left shoulder, watching the two resistance men. Petrov had taken a position near the doorway with his back to the wall and his hand not obviously near his coat but not far from it. Reed was in the kitchen but had drifted without seeming to drift to a place from which he could see both the front door and the door to the cellar. Madeleine went and stood behind Armand's chair. She was declaring herself. "Doctor," Owen said, "you know why I am here. You know what you were told before you crossed. I have 2 hours and change to bring you and that device back to the pathway and to leave this century as we found it. If you walk out of this house with me now and we destroy the storage in that thing before dawn, we can still do our jobs, yours and mine." "My job," Armand said gently, "is not what you think it is. Your job is what your contract says it is. My contract was written by people who had not read the casualty lists." He turned the tablet toward himself and touched its face. It woke. A soft, wrong light filled the corner of the kitchen. The resistance man with the bandaged hand made a sign of the cross. The peasant didn't look up from his revolver. "Come here, Major, please." Owen went. The screen showed a face. A young man, perhaps 19, in a photograph taken for a training file. Hair cut very short. He was not smiling, but he had the not smile of a boy who's been told to look serious and is trying to remember what serious feels like. Beneath the photograph, in the plain typography of an archive, Holloway, James R. PFC, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, KIA 0642, June 6th, 44, Omaha Beach, Dog Green Sector. Cause, MG 42, fire, throat. "He is 19, Armand said quietly. "His mother's name is Ellen. She lives in a town called Bedford in Virginia. She will lose him and 2 of his cousins on the same morning. Her town will lose more of its sons in the first hour of the invasion than any other town in America. She does not know this yet. Doctor. There are 1,465 of them in this file, Major. That is only the first wave on Omaha. I have all of the beaches. I have all of the drop zones. I have the men who drown in the flooded fields behind Utah because someone gave them the wrong equipment. I have the boys in the gliders that come apart on landing. I have the medics who bleed out in ditches while treating other men. I have their names and their ages and their hometowns, and in many cases I have the last letters they wrote to their mothers." His voice did not rise. That was the thing. It went on quietly, at the volume of a man reading a grocery list, and it was the more terrible for it. He closed the file. Private Holloway of Bedford, Virginia went back into the machine. I have already saved perhaps 700 of them. The ammunition dump you may have heard about. The artillery officer we shot this afternoon on a road east of Treviere. The bridge tonight. The men who would have been killed by those shells and those guns and along that road are at this moment alive. Some are asleep on ships in the Channel. Some are drinking too much in Portsmouth. Some will die anyway, of other things, in the next 3 days. But not the deaths I read. Not those specific deaths. He looked up. I understand that this is inconvenient for your mission. Owen sat down. He didn't know he had done it until he was sitting. His body had lowered itself into the chair because standing had become for a moment something requiring more from him than he could spare. Laurent's hand touched his shoulder once lightly and withdrew. "Doctor," Owen said, "the German armoured reconnaissance element that was scheduled to remain 40 kilometres inland until the afternoon of the 6th received an order tonight to move to within 11 kilometres of Omaha Beach. It is on the road now. In the timeline I remember, it does not move until after the landings. If it reaches its new position before dawn on the 6th, it will be waiting for the men in your file, the ones you saved from the artillery. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Armand was still. "Do you understand that when a Standartenführer in St. Lo signs a movement order like that, 18 hours early, it is because someone has convinced him this coast is worth defending in a way he did not previously believe? Do you understand that Private Holloway of Bedford, Virginia may not die at 0642 on Dog Green now, because he may die at 0618, 100 metres short of the shingle, in water 4 feet deep, because a tank that was not supposed to be there is firing down onto the ramp of his landing craft?" Armand's hands, flat on the table on either side of the tablet, closed slowly into fists. "You do not know that," he said. "You do not know that any specific man dies of my actions. You are speculating. I am speculating in the same way you are speculating when you say you have saved 700. You have destroyed shells. You do not know which shells were going to kill which men. You have made a moral claim on numbers no one can verify, because the timeline you are computing them against no longer exists. That is not the same. It is exactly the same, Doctor, and the only difference between us tonight is that I know it is the same and you do not want to." For the first time since they had walked in, Armand looked at him, not as an obstacle, but as a man. The candle guttered. The peasant with the moustache set down his revolver with a click that was not aggressive but not accidental. Madeleine, behind Armand, put her hand on the back of his chair. "Felix." Her voice had gone into a register Owen had not yet heard from her. A person who had been holding an argument in her own chest for hours and had just been given permission to speak it aloud. "The Hauptmann came to Uncle Guillaume's farm tonight." Armand looked up sharply. "What?" "He came because someone told him a stranger had passed through the village yesterday. That someone was not one of ours. It was a woman in the boulangerie who saw you and thought you looked wrong. She told a friend. The friend told a boy who tells things to a corporal for cigarettes. The corporal told his sergeant. The sergeant told the Hauptmann. The Hauptmann came to the nearest farm and asked questions. If these gentlemen had not arrived, my cousin Colette would be dead by now, and her father, and probably me." "Madeleine, I did not. I know you did not. I know you were careful. I am telling you that careful is not enough. I have been careful for 4 years, Felix. Careful is not enough in an occupied country. Careful only means the thing that kills you takes a little longer to arrive." Armand looked at her, and for a moment his face did something that had nothing to do with the argument, and everything to do with the fact that he had asked this woman to trust him, and she had, and it had cost her a cousin's near death and would cost more before the week was out. He closed his eyes. "I did not come to make it worse. Not to Owen. To Madeleine." "I know," she said. "None of us do. That is not a defence." Laurent sat down at the far end of the table and laid out for Armand, in French because it was fairer that way, the case that the man was not a monster, had never been a monster, was reasoning from premises Laurent himself had, on some difficult nights, entertained. Then Armand told them what he was planning to do next. There is a signal station south of Bayeux. It coordinates radio traffic for the entire coastal sector. In the timeline your major remembers, it survives the invasion. It transmits confused reports for the first 6 hours, Its confusion is a large part of why the German response is so slow. You want to destroy it, Owen said. I want to be certain it does not transmit at all. If it does not transmit, local commanders cannot receive orders through the normal chain. They will hesitate longer. Laurent said, No. Armand looked at him. Doctor, if you take that station off the air, the local commanders do not hesitate longer. They act independently. A German battalion commander who cannot reach his division does not sit and wait. That is doctrine, Doctor, since 1806. On the coast in June, what he will think his division wants is to move to the sound of the guns. That is speculation. It is doctrine. You do not silence a German staff by cutting its cables. You energize the field officers underneath it. Perhaps they will make the mistake of getting to the beaches an hour earlier than they did in the history the Major remembers. Armand was silent. You have been reading casualty files, Doctor. I have been reading command diaries. Please, listen. This is not a thing you can gamble on. Armand looked down at the tablet. His fingers traced its edge slowly as though testing whether it was really there. I have gambled on everything else, he said, mostly to himself. Owen leaned forward. Doctor, give me the tablet. Come back with us. Whatever we have already changed, we can leave the rest of it alone. The invasion still happens. Some men live who would have died. Some men die who would have lived. It will not be the history I remember, but it will be one in which we still recognize the world. Armand's hand rested on the tablet. The candle burned lower. Give me until morning. Doctor, give me until morning, Major. I have not slept in 2 days. I need to think. If in the morning you can convince me that the captain is correct about the signal station, I will give you the tablet and walk back with you to the pathway without complaint. But I cannot make this decision at 3 a.m. in a kitchen, after you have shown me a photograph of a man I've been trying not to think about for 6 months. Owen looked at Laurent. Laurent lifted one shoulder. Owen looked at Petrov. Petrov didn't move. Owen looked at Reed, and Reed, after a moment, gave the smallest possible nod. Until morning, Owen said. In this house. With us. In this house, Armand agreed. With you. He glanced at Madeleine. I am sorry about Colette. She did not answer him. She touched the back of his chair once and went out through the kitchen door into the yard, where Owen could see her through the window, standing in the rain with her face lifted to it, as though asking the sky a question she did not expect an answer to. Petrov took first watch. Reed took second. Laurent sat at the table with Armand's tablet in front of him, not touching it, only looking at it, a sleeping animal whose species he had not yet identified. Owen went upstairs and lay down on a straw mattress in a room whose window faced west toward a coast he could not see, and closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He thought about Private Holloway of Bedford, Virginia, presumably alive somewhere in the south of England, annoyed by rain and English food, and the fact that he had not been allowed to write anything specific home for weeks. He thought about a woman named Ellen in a small town in Virginia who was asleep, 6 time zones and a century and 1 unreliable timeline away, and who did not yet know that her son was in a file on a machine on a kitchen table in Normandy. He thought about the Hauptmann kneeling in the puddle with his throat opening under his hands. He thought about Madeleine's face when she had said careful, only means the thing that kills you takes a little longer to arrive. He thought about the fact that he, Major Owen Kearney, had come to this century with the finest intelligence any commander in history had ever carried, and had discovered within 4 hours that it was becoming the finest collection of dangerous fiction any commander in history had ever carried. He was almost asleep when Petrov's voice came against the plaster of the wall between their rooms. "Sir, come down." Owen was on his feet with his pistol in his hand before he had finished waking. The kitchen was as he had left it. The candle still burned. Laurent still sat at the table. The tablet was gone. So was Armand. So, from her post at the yard door was Madeleine. Laurent looked up. He didn't look angry. He looked as though he'd been expecting this and had chosen to sit at the table anyway, out of quiet, stubborn respect for the possibility of being wrong. "She took him out through the cellar," Laurent said. "About 20 minutes ago. I heard her boots on the stone. By the time I understood what I was hearing, they were gone. I'm sorry, Major." Owen was already moving toward the door. "No," Laurent said. "Wait." Petrov was down the stairs now, and Reed was coming up from below with his coat half on, and a bruise on his forehead where he had rushed the cellar door and found it barred from the outside with a beam an old peasant knew exactly how to set. Petrov held the receiver. He was looking at it. His face had gone, the colour faces went. In Owen's experience, only when the man wearing the face had just heard something he did not want to be true. "What?" "I've been listening to the divisional net all night. 4 minutes ago they sent a courier acknowledgement in clear. Someone at Standartenführer level has authorised a second movement. Not the reconnaissance element. That was the one from the Hauptmann's." "Coat. What's the second?" Petrov looked up. "A regiment, sir. Same division. They're ordering a full armoured regiment to close on the coast between Bayeux and Isigny by dawn on the 6th. Not the afternoon, not after the landings, by dawn, before the first wave hits." Owen looked at Laurent. Laurent had put his face in his hands. "That regiment does not move in the history I studied. It does not move at all until the 7th. It spends the 6th being argued about by 3 different staffs. Its non-movement is one of the reasons Omaha does not become an American disaster." He lowered his hands. "Major, if that regiment reaches the coast by dawn on the 6th, the men on Omaha will not get off the beach. They will die on the shingle, all of them, and the beachhead will not close, and the invasion will fail, and the war will not end when we remember it ending, and we will not have a world to go home to." The candle burned steadily. Rain tapped the window. In the orchard, a bird that had no business being awake at this hour tried a single hesitant note and stopped. Outside in the wet dark, on a road that no map in any archive Owen had ever studied would show correctly again, Dr. Felix Armand was walking toward a signal station south of Bayeux, carrying a tablet full of the future, in the company of a young woman who believed with all her heart that she was doing the right thing. And somewhere farther east, engines were starting, a great many of them. Owen stood in the kitchen with the candle guttering and did the arithmetic he had been trained his whole life to do without moving his face. 2 hours to portal collapse. Perhaps 90 minutes to first light on the 6th. Armand had a 20-minute head start on foot, in country he did not know, with a young woman who did. The signal station south of Bayeux was, if Laurent was right about the location, perhaps 4 hours cross-country and 2 by any road that had not been mined by someone with a good historical map. A regiment of German armour was, at this moment, receiving orders that would put it on top of the beaches by dawn, and somewhere in the Channel, or in the English South, 1,300 landing craft were being loaded with young men who did not yet know that a Frenchman from the 21st century had, in the last 16 hours, quietly rewritten the war they were about to fight. He set the pistol down on the table because he had been holding it too tightly. "Callum, how's your head?" "Fine, sir." "How's your head, really?" Reed touched the bruise above his eye. "I'll live. Old man knew what he was doing with that beam. Should have heard him. You had no reason to expect the man who buried your rig in his own turnips to lock you in his own cellar." "I had every reason, sir. I did not do the reasoning." "Take the blame later if it turns out to matter. Petrov." Petrov had not moved from the doorway. He had the receiver against his ear now, one hand cupped to it, and his face was doing the slow tightening it did when he was pulling coherence out of static. "Sir, how many nets do you have?" 4 solid. Divisional, coastal air warning, and something that keeps hopping between 2 frequencies and I think is a security battalion. There's a 5th I can catch fragments of, but I can't hold. That's the one giving me the regiment order. Can you talk on any of them?" Petrov lowered the receiver and looked at Owen for a long moment before he answered. Owen understood in that moment that Petrov had already been thinking about this question for longer than either of them had been in the kitchen. "Sir, we did not bring a transmitter capable of speaking in period. What we brought receives across a broad spectrum and encrypts on modern protocols nobody down here can hear. If I want to speak into a 1944 net, I need 1944 hardware." Madeleine mentioned a resistance transmitter. She did. Do we know where it is? She did not say. Would our peasant with the revolver know? Petrov's mouth did something that was not quite a smile. He might. Whether he tells us is another matter. He let his niece walk our target out of his cellar. He is not on our side. He is on hers. Owen looked at the older man, who had, at some point in the last minute, come back into the kitchen and was standing in the doorway to the yard with his broom of a moustache and his revolver holstered at his hip and his eyes steady on Owen's face. He was not embarrassed. He was not defiant. Either. He had the look of a man who had made a considered decision and was waiting to see what it cost him. Laurent spoke to him in low French. The older man answered. It was a short answer. Laurent translated. He says Madeleine is not a fool. If Madeleine has decided the Frenchman is right, then either the Frenchman is right or Madeleine is wrong for the first time in 4 years, and in either case he is not going to be the one to shoot her in the back. He says we are welcome to breakfast. He does not have very much bread. Ask him about the transmitter, Laurent asked. The old man considered. He said one word. Leo, Laurent translated. The boy of 15. He operates the set, hidden in a hayloft 2 farms east. If we go by the orchard, we will not be seen from the road. Will he take us? The old man answered before Laurent finished the question. He says no. He has already done as much for us as he intends to do. He will point us at the orchard and lock his door behind us and not open it again until noon, no matter what he hears. He says if we bring the war back to his door, he will not be here to answer it. Fair, Owen said, and meant it. They went out into the orchard as the rain thinned to mist. Reed moved beside Owen, Petrov ahead, Laurent behind, walking backward every 3rd step to check the road. The orchard ended at a stone wall. Beyond the wall, a lane. Beyond the lane, a second orchard. Beyond that, a low huddle of buildings, and above one of them a hayloft door slightly ajar in a way a person who did not know what to look for would not have noticed. Petrov put his hand on the wall and held them. A vehicle passed. A staff car, not a patrol, moving fast east to west with hooded headlamps and a strained engine. A driver and a passenger in a peaked cap. It took the bend at the end of the lane too fast. Its tyres shrieked on wet stones. It was gone. East to west, Laurent murmured, toward the coast. How many staff cars on this lane in the timeline you learned? None, Major. This is a farm lane. Staff cars use metalled roads. Then he's in a hurry and he does not want to be seen. They crossed the lane one at a time and went up through the second orchard and came around the back of the barn to the ladder Madeleine's uncle had described in 3 words to Laurent through his closed kitchen door. Petrov went up first. A pause, then his voice soft. Sir, it's all right. Owen went up. The hayloft was warm the way lofts full of animal below, and hay above are always warm, straw and machine oil and a faint sweat. In the corner, under a canvas that had been arranged to look like a canvas, someone had thrown over a broken piece of equipment, was a wireless set. A boy sat next to it cross-legged. He had a piece of bread in one hand and a pencil in the other, and was writing something on a pad in the light of a shielded lamp with intense concentration. He looked up when Petrov came into his line of sight. He did not startle. He looked at Petrov, then at Reed, then at Owen and Laurent as they came up behind, and then he set his bread carefully on his pad and stood. He was 15. He looked 11. Bonjour, Laurent said. The boy did not answer in words. He put out his hand, the formal, serious handshake of a young man who has decided that if he's going to die for something, He's going to at least meet the men doing the killing with the courtesy of a properly extended arm. Laurent shook it, then Owen, then Petrov. Reed, who was too tall for the loft, ducked and gave the boy a nod that in Reed's grammar was a handshake. Leo? The boy tapped his own chest. Leo. Owen crouched down by the set, a British Type 3 Mark II, matte black in the shielded lamp, an object designed by someone who genuinely wanted the operator to live. Petrov. Petrov was already beside him. His fingers moved over the set with the reverent care of a man handling an instrument he had only ever seen in a museum. 20 watts, crystal controlled, it'll do. Frequency? Wehrmacht divisional band. If they hear French plain text on their own band, it will do half our job for us. Do we have plain text to send? Petrov looked at Laurent. Laurent had already sat down on the straw and taken the pencil out of Leo's hand. He was writing on the pad with the tidy hand of a man who had drafted many careful lies in his life and knew the shape they needed to take to be believed. I am writing 3 reports. A frightened burgomeister. Of a village that does not exist, reporting parachutists. A gendarme sergeant reporting gunfire east of Bayeux. A Wehrmacht supply officer complaining that his depot has just been raided by a formation in Allied uniforms of a size he cannot estimate but which he puts tentatively at company strength. 3 separate voices. 3 transmissions, half an hour apart from 3 notional locations, each acknowledging the previous, asking whether headquarters has heard from the others. Laurent looked up. Oldest trick in the book, Major. Old because it works. A single false report is a suspicious thing. 3 false reports that reference each other are a situation. How authentic can you make them? Very. I have the vocabulary, I have the doctrine, and I have spent enough time in the German archives to know what a frightened field officer sounded like at 3 a.m. when he had not slept and thought his career was ending. Laurent's mouth did the thing that was almost a smile. The problem is not making them believable. The problem is that these transmissions will only work if the real thing they are trying to make Germans believe is happening also appears to be happening. Owen looked at Reed. Callum, your engineering kit. The one I hid in the shed cellar, sir. Go get it. We lose an hour and it's the wrong direction. The kit on your person. A knife, 6 meters of det cord, 4 blasting caps, 1 modern initiator that will pass for a clockwork mechanism if nobody looks closely, and a length of primer I can persuade to do more than it should. And whatever your pockets have that I can steal. Bridges. Not with what I have. I can drop a telegraph pole, crack a road with a shaped charge, take out a small barn if it wanted to fall down. That's the honest inventory. That will do. For what, sir? For persuading a German intelligence officer at 4 a.m. that something is happening in 3 places at once. Reed absorbed this. Then he grinned. Not a common event on Reed's face, and it changed his face in a way that made him look, briefly, exactly as young as he was. Aye, sir. Owen turned to the boy who had been watching all of this with the fierce attention of a 15-year-old who did not understand every word but understood the tone and had decided the tone was one he wanted to be on the correct side of. Leo, Madeleine. The boy's face closed. Madeleine, where? Leo looked at Laurent. Laurent said something soft in French. The boy listened. His eyes went from Laurent to Owen and back. Then, after a very long private conversation with himself, he took the pencil back from Laurent and drew a line on the pad, and another branching from it, and a square at the end of the branch. He wrote a word beside the square in the shaky, careful capitals of a boy who had not written many words in his life for stakes this high. Laurent read it. His face did not change, which was itself an answer. There is a farmhouse, 2 kilometres south, owned by the widow of a schoolmaster shot in 1941. The resistance uses it as a staging point for anyone moving toward Bayeux. Madeleine will take our man there first to rest. She will not walk him through the night. She will wait for the dawn to move again. If we go now, We can reach it before they leave." "How does the boy know?" Laurent asked. The boy answered quietly 3 words. Laurent said, "She is his sister." Petrov stayed. He stayed with the boy and the Parisais and a schedule of transmissions Laurent wrote out for him, time to arrive at Wehrmacht divisional intercept at the moments they would do the most damage. He stayed because a man who could not operate a Parisais by touch in the dark could not do what needed to be done, and Petrov was the only member of the team who could. He did not argue. He said only, "Sir, if this goes badly for you, do not come back for me. Get the tablet home." Understood. And Leo? Owen looked at the boy. "What about him?" "He's 15. If the Germans take this loft, they will not treat him as 15. "I know. Then you know why I am asking." Owen crouched down in front of Leo and put his hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. It was thin under the coat. Leo looked at him with the level appraising stare of a boy who had already accepted that most of what happened next was not going to be up to him. "Leo," Owen tapped the boy's chest, then his own. "Frère." The boy nodded once slowly. Then Owen went. Back down the ladder into the wet dark, and Reed and Laurent followed him, and they did not look back at the loft, because looking back at people you're leaving in a place is a habit that gets those people killed. Reed worked on the way. He did not stop moving to do it. He walked, and while he walked he divided out his tiny inventory into 3 parcels and rewrapped his det cord, and did careful things with a modern initiator that made it look less modern, and more like something a Frenchman in a barn might have assembled from a mantel clock and a bad decision. His hands did this at pace, in the dark, while his boots kept up with Owen's and his breath kept even, and his eyes stayed on the fields. Laurent, moving beside him, murmured a short list of place names. "The rail junction at Le Mollet-Litry. That is your first. A stretch of track 100 metres north of the platform, where a single charge on the outside rail, on the curve, will derail anything that comes through. It will not stop a regiment. It will make a regiment take 4 hours to figure out an alternate route. Aye. The road junction south of Trevière. There is a stone crossroads shrine. If you drop the shrine into the road, no armoured vehicle wider than a Kübelwagen gets past without going through a hedgerow, and you've seen the hedgerows. Aye. And a telegraph pole, any pole between here and Bayeux, preferably on the line the signal station uses to talk to St. Lô. Petrov will tell us which one when we get closer. That's my 3. That is your 3. And I am doing this alone." "You're doing this alone," Owen said, "because Laurent and I are going to intercept Armand at the widow's farm, and 1 man moves faster and makes less noise than 3, and because you are the only one of us who can do it." Reed glanced sideways at him. "Sir, if I fail on any of the 3, the deception falls apart. I know. And if the Germans catch me, I know. And if this goes badly for me, sir, do not come back for you. Get the tablet home. Yes, Callum, I heard Petrov the first time." Reed was quiet for a step or 2. "Sir, I want to note for the record that I think this is a good plan." "Thank you, Callum. I also want to note that I have never in my life said that about a plan I was about to execute." Also noted. At a place where a path split from the cart track, Laurent stopped. "Callum." He put his hand on Reed's shoulder, the gesture of a French officer to an English one at a moment, when both of them understood exactly what was being asked. "Go with God, or with whatever version of God engineers in your country ask for. Set your charges, then run. Do not stop. Do not look back." "Sir." Reed shifted his coat. He gave Owen a nod that in Reed's grammar was a salute, an oath, and a farewell. He stepped off the track. The dark took him inside 4 paces. The widow's farm was as Leo had drawn it. A stone house at the end of a lane. A byre attached. An old orchard. A well. A lamp in the kitchen window, though the hour was somewhere between the last watch of the night and the first of the morning, and no honest household had a lamp burning at that hour. Owen and Laurent came at it through the orchard from the east. They lay in wet grass beneath the last row of apples and watched. 2 shadows in the kitchen, Laurent whispered. One seated, one moving, neither in uniform. Armand and Madeleine. Yes, and a third, older, standing by the sideboard. That will be the widow. Anyone in the byre? I cannot tell. There is a horse. A horse. An old one. She keeps it because shooting an old horse is a thing she has decided she's not going to do while she can help it. Leo told me about her. She is 71. Her husband was shot in a schoolyard in front of the children he had been teaching that morning. He had refused to name 3 of the older boys who had drawn something on the wall of the mairie. She has been useful to the resistance ever since, in the way people become useful when they have decided the worst thing that can happen to them has already happened. Then we do not go in through the kitchen door. They went in through the byre. The horse turned its head when they came in, and considered them with the wet gravity of a very old horse, and did not make a sound. Owen laid the flat of his hand on its neck for a moment as they passed, because it seemed the correct thing to do. The byre communicated with the kitchen through a low door held shut by a wooden peg. Laurent lifted the peg. The door opened onto a passage that smelled of onions. At the end of the passage, the kitchen door stood ajar. Yellow light spilled through the gap. Voices spoke on the other side of it, low. Armand's voice, Madeleine's, and a third, older, unhurried, a woman used to being obeyed by her own house. They were arguing, not shouting. The argument had gone past shouting hours ago, and was now in the quiet, tired place arguments go when the people having them love each other and know that whatever is decided will not repair what has been said. Laurent held up his hand. "On peut pas te laisser faire cela seul," Madeleine was saying. "You're not letting me do anything, child," the widow said, in French, but slowly, as though for the benefit of a listener she had not seen but suspected. "I am telling you what I have decided. There is a difference." Laurent's face had gone still in a new way. "She knows we are here," he breathed. "How?" "The horse." The horse didn't make a sound. "Precisely." Laurent pushed the kitchen door open. The widow sat at the head of the table, thin white hair pinned up in a bun that looked older than she did. Black wool dress mended so many times the mending had become the dress. She looked at the 2 men coming into her kitchen with pistols not raised but not hidden either, and she did not stand, and she did not put down her cup of what was probably not really coffee, and she said in careful English, "Gentlemen, we are moving. Bring your questions and walk." She was already rising. Owen blinked. "Madam, Major, Madeleine told me everything when they arrived. An hour ago now. I have had 4 years to think about that signal station, and 1 hour to think about you. You do not have time to argue with me at a table, neither do I. Come." She lifted a coil of wire from a hook by the door and put it in Madeleine's hands, and a canvas bag off the sideboard and hung it over her own shoulder, and pulled on a coat that had been ready by the wall. Armand had risen too. The tablet lay in front of him on the table. His face in the lamplight had aged 10 years in the hour since Owen had last seen it. "Doctor," Owen said, "the tablet." Armand looked at it. He looked at Madeleine, who was already at the door with a coil of wire in her hands. He looked at the widow who had paused on the threshold with the composed, steady patience of a woman who had been asked her whole life to wait for men to catch up. He slid the tablet across the table. Owen picked it up and put it into the interior pocket of his coat without looking at it. "I will walk back with you, Major," Armand said. His voice was quiet. "I will walk back with you, and I will not touch this device again. Do with it what you were sent to do. Doctor, thank you. Do not thank me yet." Armand almost smiled. It was a very small almost. "There is a regiment on the road, and none of what I have just done in this kitchen does anything to stop it." The widow led them out through the byre, past the old horse, into the lane. Her son-in-law was already at the cart, a heavy man with a face like a badly folded map. harnessing the widow's other horse in the last dark. Edouard used to install telephone poles for the postal service, the widow said, moving without breaking stride. Before the war, he repaired the line between the signal stations south of Bayeux and Saint-Lô. He knows a culvert 2 kilometres from here where the cable runs through, in a way that a man with pliers can do in 10 minutes, what a bomb would do in 10 seconds, and with a great deal less noise. Owen kept pace beside her. "You're proposing to cut the line." "I am proposing that we cut the line, that the station's operators spend the morning of the 6th trying frantically to reach a Saint-Lô that will not answer, that they send couriers and transmit contradictory reports and do, in effect, exactly what your captain says they did in the history he remembers. But because the line is cut and not because the station is destroyed, the Germans will not know we have done anything to them at all. They will simply be, for the critical hours, deaf." Laurent, moving on her other side, said quietly, "Madame, that is a very good plan. I have had 4 years to think about that station, Captain." Armand walked half a pace behind them, saying nothing. His head was down. The widow glanced back at him without slowing. Felix, look at me." Armand looked. "You have not seen the casualty files I have," she said. "I have seen the schoolyard where my husband was shot. I have seen my daughter's face when the telegram came about her fiancé. I have seen this village emptied of every man between 16 and 40. I do not need to see your files. I have my own. This is enough for me. Is it enough for you?" Armand did not answer at once. Then quietly, "It is enough." "Good. Then keep walking." At the cart she stopped. She turned to Owen. "Edouard drives Madeleine and me to the culvert. Edouard also drives Armand to the temporal farm before the 6th. He will not be arguing about it. Yes?" "Yes." Edouard in the back of the cart said nothing. He held out a hand and helped the widow up onto the box. "Major," she said, "one thing more. Madam, when you crossed into my country you brought the future with you, and the future has begun killing people in it who are not going to die tonight. Do not carry the weight of that alone. Some of us have been dying in this country for 4 years without help from anyone's future. My husband did not know what year he was going to be shot in either. Whatever you have done or are about to do, you did not begin it, and you will not end it, and it is not entirely yours." She looked at Armand as she said it. Armand kept his head down. Then she picked up the reins. The cart rolled out of the yard into the dark. Edouard did not look back. Madeleine in the seat beside the widow looked back once. Then the lane took her from sight. Owen and Armand and Laurent stood in the wet yard, and it was at that precise moment that the first explosion reached them. Distant, not loud. The dull thump of a charge going off inside a culvert or against a rail, several kilometres to the east, in the direction of Le Mollet-Litry. "That," Owen said, "was Callum, on schedule." Petrov's voice came into his ear a moment later. He had been silent for half an hour. Now he was not. "Sir, Petrov." First transmission just went out. "Burgermeister of the imaginary village. He is very frightened. Divisional intercept has acknowledged. Second in 28 minutes. "Understood. Sir, there is something else." Owen's stomach, which had done unpleasant work in the last 12 hours and had not complained, made a quiet objection. "Go. The regiment, it has just changed course." "Toward the coast?" "Sir, away from the coast. Ordered to redeploy to a position between Caumont and Villers-Bocage. Effective immediately." Laurent went very still. "Say that again." "The regiment has been ordered to a position 20 kilometres inland of its previous heading. Effective immediately. Same Standartenführer in Saint-Lô who sent it toward the coast an hour ago." "On what grounds?" "That a large Allied airborne concentration has been reported forming in the woods between Caumont and Villers-Bocage, and the regiment is required to move to counter it before it can consolidate." Owen closed his eyes. Petrov. Sir, did you send that report? No, sir. Did Laurent write that report? No, sir. Laurent wrote a burgomaster, a gendarme, and a supply officer. None of them said anything about Cormont. Then who? A pause. Sir, I have been listening to the German intercept net for the last 4 hours. Since midnight they have been receiving reports, from sources they cannot identify, describing Allied commando activity across a front of perhaps 60 kilometres. Some of them are Felix's resistance actions. Some are the Hauptmann's people not reporting in from Guillaume's farm. Some are things they cannot explain at all. And in the last hour, 3 separate German intelligence officers in 3 different sectors have independently begun using the same phrase to describe the presumed enemy force. What phrase? Das Geisterbataillon, sir. Owen opened his eyes. He looked at Armand, who was standing in the wet yard with his hands loose at his sides, listening. They have invented it themselves, Owen said. Yes, sir. Before we ask them to. Yes, sir. We are, at the moment, not creating the Ghost Battalion. We're catching up to it. And the regiment is turning inland, away from the beaches, to hunt a battalion that does not exist and that they invented without our help. Sir, the road toward the coast is emptying. For perhaps 3 seconds, Owen allowed himself the dangerous luxury of believing that a plan he had not yet fully constructed had already worked without him. Then Petrov spoke again. Sir, the staff car. What staff car? The one you saw on the farm lane, east to west, fast. What about it? I have been trying to identify it since you reported it. It was not talking to anyone. But in the last 20 seconds, a new voice has come up on the security battalion band, and it is transmitting from a location moving west on that same lane, and it is transmitting in clear, and our intercept algorithm rates it at 91% probability of being an SS Obersturmbannführer from the security service based in St. Sir, he is transmitting a report to his own chain of command, not to the Wehrmacht. He has personally inspected the farm belonging to one Guillaume Rousseau, in which he found 3 of his men dead by unidentified weapons, and a half-track disabled by a form of sabotage his mechanics cannot explain. He is reporting that the pattern of the wounds and the nature of the sabotage are consistent with, quote, an enemy technology of a type not previously encountered on the Western Front. Owen was standing cold in the yard. Petrov. He is transmitting that he is en route to the location where the divisional Standartenführer has directed his armoured regiment, and that upon arrival he intends to take personal command of the investigation, because he has reason to believe the true nature of the enemy in this sector is, quote, of a character requiring intelligence assets rather than armour. Meaning? Meaning, sir, a very senior SS intelligence officer has just concluded, on the basis of 3 dead men in a courtyard, that the Ghost Battalion may be something other than a battalion, and he is going personally to Caumont-Levante to find out what. Owen looked at Armand. Armand had understood already. His face said so. If an SS Obersturmbannführer with the authority to countermand a Wehrmacht regimental order reached Caumont-Levante before dawn, he would look at the empty woods where an airborne concentration was supposed to be, find nothing, and understand within an hour that he'd been played. He would then turn the regiment back around and put it on the coast road. And this time the Wehrmacht Standartenführer would not argue with him, because SS intelligence in June of 1944 did not lose arguments with divisional command. The regiment would arrive at the beaches by dawn on the 6th. The men in the landing craft would die on the shingle. The war Owen remembered would end at some other date, in some other way, if it ended at all. There was one road between the staff car and Caumont-Levante. Callum was on it, setting his second charge, alone, at a crossroad shrine, with detonating cord and 4 blasting caps and an initiator he had built to look like a mantle clock. Petrov, raise Callum. There was a pause. Petrov did not do long pauses. Sir, Callum is not responding. Try again. Sir, his transponder went dark 2 minutes ago, between the first charge and the second. Owen looked at Armand. Doctor, you will go to the temporal farm. Now. On foot. Guillaume will get you the last kilometres when you reach the lane. Wait for us there. Major, that is not a request. Armand looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Owen touched the tablet inside his coat where it lay against his ribs. It was lighter than he had expected. It weighed, in his hand, almost nothing. All the future weighed almost nothing. He and Laurent went into the lane at a run. In his ear, Petrov's voice. Sir, third transmission going out in 12 minutes. Supply officer, do you still want it? Send it. Send all of it. Send more than we wrote. Make it a chorus, Petrov. Make it every frightened voice you can put on that band. Make them believe there is a battalion in every hedgerow between here and Villers-Bocage and Petrov. Sir, if Callum comes up on the net, tell him I'm coming for him. Tell him to hold on. Sir. The eastern sky, above the widow's orchard, had begun on some level below vision to consider the idea of being lighter. Somewhere out on the dark lane, a second engine started, then a third. Then, distantly, from the direction of the crossroad shrine where Callum Reed had been laying a charge alone, came the hard cough of a pistol shot. Then two more. Then silence. Owen ran. He ran the way a man runs when he has already accepted that he will arrive too late and is running anyway, because arriving too late in Iraq person is a different arithmetic than arriving too late by radio. Laurent ran beside him. Neither spoke. Their boots came down in the wet grass of the widow's orchard, and then in the mud of the lane, and then in the harder ruts of the cart track that ran east toward the crossroad shrine. Petrov, give me the shrine. Sir, I have nothing. Transponder still dark. No ambient audio. How far? 2.1 kilometres. You're on the correct track. The staff car. Slowed at the first charge site, stopped for 90 seconds. Moving again. He's heading in the general direction of the shrine because there is no other route unless he wants to detour 10 kilometres through Bayeux. How long? 11 minutes. Owen did the math. It was not favourable math. He ran faster. Major, Laurent said, not out of breath. The shots. I heard them. They were not his suppressed sidearm. I know. So he did not fire them. I know. They came around a bend and the countryside opened. Ahead, perhaps a kilometre, a hump of ground sat in the middle of the fields with a darker shape on top of it. The crossroads shrine, a stone virgin, in fact, set on a plinth at the junction of four small roads. 400 metres out when Petrov's voice changed. Sir, Callum's transponder just came back up. Where? Same location. He must have shielded it deliberately. Sir, he's broadcasting a text-only pulse. 3 characters. Repeating. What are they? SST? Say again. Sierra Sierra Tango. Sir, he's telling us he has a shot set. He wants clearance to fire it. Owen almost stopped running. He didn't stop. A man who stops running in the middle of a decision like this is a man who has stopped for the wrong reason. A shot set was Reed's private code for a demolition placed under conditions in which the operator could not withdraw. A charge you set when you had accepted the initiator was going to be your own hand. Petrov, his status. Asking, sir. Response. 2 words. Leg. Found. Owen closed his eyes for one running stride and opened them. Leg. Reed was hit. Found. Someone had found him at the shrine, which meant the staff car had scouted ahead, or a patrol had come out from Bayeux, or, more likely, the SS officer in the staff car was not the kind of man who travelled without a security element, and had put a rider or 2 on motorcycles a kilometre ahead of him for exactly this kind of country and exactly this kind of night. At the shrine, if Owen had been able to see it, Reed was sitting with his back to the plinth in the wet dark. his right hand pressed against the outside of his thigh, where a rifle round had gone through, cleanly and hot. The trouser leg was black with what would in daylight be red. In his other hand, the initiator, the mantle clock housing he had rebuilt on the walk here, warm now from being held. Around the plinth in a rough circle, det cord looped 3 times, tied off with the last of his primer. 2 blasting caps. The 3rd had gone into the first charge at Le Mollet Litry. The 4th was in his shirt pocket. He had put it there after the 3 who had come around the plinth were down. He had killed them with his sidearm at contact range because they had come around expecting to find a farmer. A 4th was somewhere in the hedgerow now, either bleeding out or trying to get up. Reed could not spare the time to find out. He could hear the engines, motorcycles first, the staff car behind. He had perhaps 120 seconds. He was doing arithmetic in his head about the weight of stone above the roadway and the pressure wave he could shape with what he had, and about whether he could roll himself into the ditch on the west side of the plinth after firing the initiator, and he had already concluded, without allowing himself to say the word, that he could not. He keyed the transponder. Staff car E-Tier 7. Will take it with the shrine. Request clearance. Then he waited, breathing through his teeth for the reply. In Owen's ear, Petrov said, "Sir, he wants to drop the shrine on the car, with himself under it. He does not put it that way, sir, but yes." Laurent glanced at him without turning his head. "Major, you cannot reach him in 7 minutes." "I know. Not on foot. Not from here." "I know, Laurent." They ran another 50 metres in silence. The shrine was closer. Owen could see it now as more than a shape. The stone woman with her arms out, faintly luminous in the not quite dawn. And at her base a darker huddle that he understood after a moment was Reed. "Petrov, tell him no. Sir, tell him to hold. Tell him I'm 400 metres out and closing. Tell him if he fires that charge with himself under it, I will come back in 100 years and dig him up and shout at him." Another pause. Then, in a voice as close to gentle as Petrov's got, "Sir, he's asking whether that is an order or a request." Owen stopped running. He had not intended to. His body did it. His body had understood before his mind was willing to, that the answer to that question mattered more than the seconds it would cost him. Laurent stopped beside him. They stood in the wet cart track in the not quite dawn with the shrine 400 metres ahead and a staff car 6 minutes behind and an SS Obersturmbannführer inside the staff car who was one clear road from turning a regiment around and killing every man in a landing craft off Omaha Beach. Owen thought about Reed. Reed an hour ago in a hayloft grinning like a boy at his own bad idea. Reed at the temporal farm crawling under a half-track with pliers because Owen had asked, calm, without commentary. Reed, who had come with them because someone had asked him to, and who had done every unreasonable thing asked of him that night without complaining once. The sound of 3 pistol shots 20 minutes ago, and the fact that Reed was still on the net after them. 1,000 men on the shingle at 0642. "Petrov, sir, tell him it is a request. Sir, tell him it is a request from his commanding officer, who is asking him to fire the charge if in his judgment it is the only way to stop that car. Tell him his commanding officer is asking him, not ordering him, and tell him his commanding officer says thank you." There was a longer pause. Owen could see Petrov in the loft with the boy beside him, keying the message on the paraset, hearing himself send words he had not thought he would send that night. "Sent, sir." Owen started running again. Laurent came with him. Response. One word. Understood. They ran. At the shrine, if Owen had been able to see it, Reed was reading the message. He read it twice. He touched the initiator with his thumb. Warm. Ready. He looked up at the stone woman above him. She was very worn. 700 years of Norman weather had softened the folds of her robe and blurred the features of her face until she was more suggestion than portrait, a shape that had been a woman and would go on being one for a while yet. He said, aloud to her, because there was no one else to say it to, "This is a bad plan, and I have never said that about a plan I was about to execute either." The first motorcycle came around the bend, headlamp hooded to a slit. Reed closed his eyes for one breath. He thought, in that breath, of a woman in Aberdeen who would receive a letter written by a French captain in a language she would find carefully translated on the second page. Then he opened his eyes and put his thumb on the initiator and waited for the car. Owen and Laurent were 200 metres from the shrine when the first motorcycle came around the far bend, headlamp a smear. 150 when a second came out behind it. 100 when the staff car itself rounded the bend, moving faster than a staff car had any right to move on a wet Norman lane in the last hour before dawn. Owen and Laurent went off the track into the ditch at the same instant. They came up in the ditch with pistols drawn uselessly because they were still 90 metres from a target moving at 40 kilometres an hour, and the target was going to be at the shrine in 9 seconds. Petrov's voice came into Owen's ear. "Sir, he's asking me to tell you." The world went white. Owen would remember it afterward in the wrong order. He would remember the sound first, which was wrong, because the sound arrived after the light. A great flat cough, felt in the chest more than heard in the ears. The sound of a very large object being pushed downward by something that didn't care about the object's opinion. He would remember, after the sound, that he was on his back in the ditch with mud in his mouth, and something hot in his left thigh, where a fragment of stone the size of a coin had come through the mud and lodged shallow in the muscle. He would remember Laurent on his side next to him, alive, blinking. He would remember that the sky above the shrine had a shape in it that was not sky, a rising slow shape of dust and stone and smoke that hung for a long moment as though considering whether to come down. When it came down in a rain of pieces on the wet fields around the crossroads, and the pieces made a sound like heavy rain on a slate roof, which was a sound he had heard all night and would never hear again the same way. He would remember, most clearly, the silence afterward. Not absolute silence. The tick of hot metal cooling somewhere in the mess where the staff car had been. The hiss of steam where an engine block had ended up in a puddle. Distantly, the sound of an aircraft, a single engine going east, high up. A courier or a scout or a man in the RAF who was up early because his squadron was up early, because at some point in the next 24 hours a great many aircraft were going to be up. Owen sat up in the ditch. Pain shifted in his thigh, dull and definite. He put his hand on it. His hand came away wet. The shrine was gone. The crossroads was a crater. The staff car was in 3 pieces distributed across a semicircle of perhaps 30 metres. The 2 motorcycles were not visible, which meant they'd gone into the hedgerow or been pushed under things or simply been unmade by the pressure wave. At the near edge of the crater, half standing, half crouched, was a man. Not Reed. He was in field grey, and he had lost his cap, and he was holding one arm across his stomach in a way that suggested he was doing so because his stomach required holding. He was looking around him with the slow, uncomprehending survey of a man whose brain had not yet informed him that his body was already done. He saw Owen and Laurent in the ditch. He raised his other hand. It was empty. He was reaching. The reach of a drowning man for something to hold on to. Then he sat down. And then he lay down. And then he stopped moving. Laurent beside Owen said quietly, "SS, collar tabs." The Obersturmbannführer. "Yes." Owen climbed out of the ditch. His left leg took his weight and complained. He walked not fast to the near edge of the crater. He was not looking for the German. He was looking for the base of the plinth, or the huddle he had seen there from 400 metres, and he was looking for it with the professional part of himself that had done this walk in 3 previous countries and knew what he was going to find. He did not find a body. There was not enough left to find. He stood at the edge of the crater and closed his eyes for a longer count than he had permitted himself all night, and he said, aloud, to no one in particular, and specifically to a warrant officer of the Special Air Service named Callum Reed, "Thank you." Laurent came up beside him. They stood there together for perhaps 10 seconds. Then Petrov's voice, "Sir, the regiment, still turning inland, countermanding order from St. Lo has not gone out. It is not going to. No, sir, because the man who was going to send it is in a field." "Yes, sir." Petrov was silent for 2 seconds. Then, "Sir, the widow's cart just passed under my window. She reached the culvert. On her way back, she waved. Edouard is driving. Madeleine has an empty coil of wire in her lap. She held it up so I could see." Owen opened his eyes. The sky above the crater was grey, and in the east, above a coast Owen could not see, was a first pale suggestion of the day. Petrov, time to portal collapse. 1 hour, 10 minutes. Time from here to the temporal farm. On foot, sir, given your current position and the widow's cart being unavailable to you until it returns to her farm, 40 minutes if you move. Then we start moving, and someone binds this leg. Laurent was already crouched beside him, cutting a strip from his own coat. "Callum," Owen said, mostly to himself. "Callum is home," Laurent said. They didn't speak for the first stretch of the walk. They went west because the temporal farm was west, and they went cross-country, because the roads were now full of things they did not want to meet. The rain that had fallen for most of the night had stopped. Mist lay in the hollows of the fields. In one hedgerow a thrush began to sing, which was a sound Owen had not heard in a long time, and which struck him now as almost obscenely ordinary. At the second hedgerow Laurent said, "Major, yes. We didn't save him. No, he knew we would not. Yes. That is a distinction that matters, I think." "It matters," Owen said, "to Callum." They walked another 100 metres. "The pole," Laurent said. "He never got to the pole." "No, it didn't matter in the end." "It mattered to Callum," Owen said. "He knew he was one short." They walked another 100 metres. "Major, when we return, I would like to be the one who writes the letter." Owen looked at him. Laurent was walking with his eyes forward and his hands in the pockets of the peasant's coat that did not quite fit him. His face wore its usual composed neutrality. Only around the eyes did it show anything, and what it showed was the tightness of a man who had already begun composing the letter in his head and did not want to be talked out of writing it. "You may write the letter," Owen said. "Thank you, Major." The temporal farm was as they had left it. The half-track sat where Petrov had killed it. The Hauptmann was still behind the barn where Reed had dragged him, though Guillaume had come out at some point in the last hours and covered the body with a piece of sailcloth out of some private notion of what was owed even to dead enemies. The 2 smokers were in the collapsed shed. Guillaume Rousseau was in his doorway, wearing his same nightshirt now with a coat over it, and he watched Owen and Laurent come up out of the wet fields with the same steady, undramatic gaze he had watched them from the night before. He had bread. It was fresh. He had baked it in the last hour. Owen understood without asking that this had been his contribution to whatever the morning was going to be. They ate standing in the yard. Owen could not remember afterward what the bread had tasted like. Only that it had been warm and that his hands holding it had been shaking, and that he had noticed the shaking in a detached way and had not been ashamed of it. Colette brought coffee. It was not really coffee. It was as good as she could do. She did not look at Owen while she poured it. But as she was passing him, she put her hand on his forearm for the length of a heartbeat, and then removed it, and went back into the house. Guillaume, watching her go, said something in his low, broken Norman French to Laurent. Laurent translated. He says his daughter has not spoken a word since the courtyard. He says he thinks she will speak again. He says he doesn't blame us. He says his family had a niece in Caen who was killed by an Allied bomb in April, and that the killing of people who ought not to die has been going on in this country long enough that one more courtyard is not going to make him hate anyone. Laurent hesitated. He says also, and I am translating this exactly, that we are welcome to come back through his farm any morning we like, though he suspects we're not going to. Owen looked at the old man. The old man nodded once gravely and went back into his house. Owen went into the collapsed shed and lifted the slab with Laurent's help, and they took the modern rigs out of the turnips and they put them back on. Owen's thigh throbbed under the field dressing. He was going to limp for a while, and he was going to keep the fragment. Petrov came down out of the loft with the boy Leo. 31 minutes, sir, Petrov said quietly as he crossed the yard. Owen heard him. Owen did not answer him. Owen did not hurry. Leo in the daylight looked 12. He walked beside Petrov and he carried Petrov's receiver as though it were a chalice, and when he arrived in the courtyard he set it down on the wall of the well with care, and then he looked at Owen and said, in careful English learned in the last 2 hours from a Polish sergeant who spoke 6 languages and taught by pointing at objects and grunting, "Sister, come, soon." "Thank you, Leo. Thank you." The boy tried the words carefully. "For sister." Owen crouched down. His thigh protested. He held out his hand. Leo took it. They shook. Again the formal, serious handshake. "Leo," Owen said. "Frère." The boy did something surprising then. He stepped forward and put his arms around Owen's neck for perhaps 2 seconds, and then stepped back, and stood at attention as though he had done something for which he expected to be corrected. Owen did not correct him. "Petrov," he said, without looking away from the boy. "Sir?" "He goes with the widow after this. She has room." "Sir, I already told him. The widow said yes before I asked her." The cart came into the yard in the first honest light of the 6th of June, and the widow was driving and Madeleine was beside. Her and Edward was in the back, and all 3 of them were wet to the skin and covered in mud to the elbows, and none of them appeared to have taken any damage more serious than the mud. The widow reined in. She looked at Owen from the seat of her cart with the same tired blue eyes. "Major, madam, it is done. Both spans?" "Both. And a good 6 metres of cable removed and dropped into the culvert. They will spend a week finding the second cut if they find it at all. Their engineers will suspect the weather. The station is deaf. It will remain deaf through your dawn." "Thank you." "You're welcome." She looked at the space in the yard where Reed was not. "Your engineer. He's not coming back with us." She nodded once. She did not offer any of the standard consolations that would have been an insult from a woman who had buried a husband against a schoolyard wall. "He stopped the car." She was not asking. Everyone in this valley had heard the explosion. "He stopped the car. Then he was a good man, and you were fortunate to have him, and I'm sorry for your loss." Owen bowed his head. It was a small motion. It was the largest motion he had in him. Behind him, from the direction of the house, Armand came out into the yard. He was carrying a canvas bag. His coat was buttoned. His face in the daylight was older than it had been in the kitchen, and there was in it a settled quality that had not been there before. Armand looked at Owen and said nothing. Owen took the tablet from the interior pocket where he had been carrying it. He held it out. Armand looked at it. He did not take it. "Major, I do not want to be the one who destroys it, but I will." He took it. He walked to the well. He looked down into it. Then he raised the tablet in both hands and brought it down against the stone lip of the well with the sudden, decisive violence of a man who has decided not to allow himself the luxury of hesitation. The screen cracked. He struck it again. The casing split. He struck it a 3rd time, and the storage module, a dark rectangle no larger than a matchbook, came free and skittered across the cobbles. Reed's initiator, The mantel clock housing Owen had carried unused all night was still on the shelf in the collapsed shed where Owen had unpacked it 15 minutes earlier. Owen picked it up. He placed it on top of the storage module. He set the timer for 2 minutes and walked away. Everyone in the yard walked away with him. They stood behind the barn. They did not speak. Guillaume stood with his arm around Colette's shoulders. Leo stood between Petrov and Madeleine, holding both their hands, which he would not have permitted anyone to see him do last night. The widow stood with her hands folded in front of her as she had stood at her kitchen sideboard. Armand stood a little apart. The charge went off. It was a very small sound. It did not even rattle the windows. When they came back around the barn, there was a black scorch on the cobbles and a fine powder that had been, 30 seconds ago, a century of history. Armand looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to Owen. "Major, let us go home." They went down into the cellar of the collapsed shed where the pathway waited. It was, as it had been, not spectacular. The air smelled of turnips and wet stone, and there was in one corner a shimmer as of heat rising off a road on a summer day, though the cellar was cold. Owen felt the pressure behind his ears he had felt the first time. His teeth vibrated. Madeleine came down into the cellar with them. She stood on the stone floor in her muddy coat and looked at the shimmer and at Armand and at Owen. Petrov had already gone through. Laurent was at the threshold waiting. "Monsieur," she said to Owen, "Mademoiselle." She looked at him for a long moment. She was going to ask. He had known since he had first seen her face in the courtyard that she was going to ask, and he had known also that when she asked, he was not going to be able to answer honestly, because the honest answer was that he no longer knew, and the honest answer to the question she was going to ask had never been in the file, because the file had contained the names of soldiers, and Madeleine Rousseau was not a soldier. "Do I live?" she said. He looked at her. He thought of the widow telling him about her husband against the schoolyard wall. He thought of Callum in the crater. He thought of the young woman in front of him, 24, with a steen across her back and mud to her elbows, who'd walked into a courtyard the night before and told him that the man he'd come to arrest was right. "I do not know," he said. She nodded. She had wanted the honest answer, not the reassuring one, and she recognised the honest answer when she got it. "Do we win?" she said. "You did once." She smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. It was tired, and it was one of the finest things he'd seen in his life. "Then we'll do it again," she said. She stepped back. Owen looked at Armand. Armand looked at Madeleine. He said in French 3 words Owen did not understand and did not need to. Madeleine answered him in 3 of her own. Armand nodded and turned to the shimmer. He went through. Owen was the last. He looked at Madeleine Rousseau, who stood there watching him with the level, considered attention of a young woman who had already begun to disappear into a history the man in front of her was about to leave and never come back to. "Mademoiselle." "Monsieur." "Thank you. You're welcome." He turned. He stepped into the shimmer. There was a moment in which he was in 2 places. His feet were on stone. His feet were on concrete. There were candles. There were fluorescent lights. There was rain smell. There was the smell of new plastic and cold air. He could hear Madeleine breathing behind him in a cellar in June 1944, and he could hear a machine humming softly in front of him in a laboratory in September 2049, and for perhaps 2 seconds these things were the same room. Then one of them won. He came out into the light. There were people. He recognised them, distantly. A woman in a white coat with her hand at her mouth. A man with a headset saying something into a microphone in the calm, slightly too loud voice of a man reporting an outcome he had not expected. Monitors. Blue and white lights of an operating temporal array. A bench along one wall on which Petrov was already sitting, and Laurent and Armand all of them wet, all of them muddy, all of them looking at the room around them with the confused expression of people who had left a place 2 minutes ago in their own time and a night ago in the time they had come from. The clock on the wall said 9:14. They had been gone, on this side of the pathway, for 22 seconds. The woman in the white coat lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked at Owen. "Major, you're 3 men." "Yes." "You went in as 4. "Yes." She did not ask the next question. She'd understood the answer. Armand, on the bench, put his face in his hands. Owen walked past the woman in the white coat, past the man with the headset, past the racks of instruments and the humming array, to the console at the far end of the room where the historical database was, and he sat down at it. His leg hurt. He touched the screen. It woke. He typed 4 words. Operation Overlord Casualties. Omaha. The screen filled with numbers. He read them. He read them again. He sat there for a long time reading them. Laurent came over after a while and stood behind him, then Petrov, then Armand. Nobody spoke. The numbers on the screen were not the numbers Owen remembered. Some were higher, some were lower. The total on the first day at that beach was almost identical to the total Owen carried in his head, within the margin of what any 2 historians might reasonably disagree about. A different number, almost the same number. He scrolled. Bedford, Virginia. He typed the name in the search field. The screen filled with a list. Private James R. Holloway, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, killed in action, 6 June 1944, Omaha Beach, Dog Green Sector, different time, different cause. His throat was intact. He had been killed by shrapnel from an 88 at 0631 while sheltering behind a beach obstacle. He had been 19. His mother's name was Ellen. Armand made a sound that was not a word. Owen did not look at him. He scrolled further. The town of Bedford. The list of its dead on that day. He counted. He had known the number he was going to find, and he had also known that he did not know it, and both had been true at the same time all the way from the cellar in Normandy to the console in front of him. The number was 1 less than he remembered. He did not know which one. He closed the file. Behind him, Laurent said quietly, "Major, look at this." Laurent had opened another database on a second screen. German intelligence. Records, declassified in 1997, catalogued in 2003, indexed by the Temporal Project because everything relevant to Overlord had been indexed by the Temporal Project. Reports dated between June 5th and June 6th, 1944, from German intelligence stations across Normandy, describing encounters with an Allied formation whose size and composition none of the reports could agree upon. Estimated strength from 20 men to a full brigade. Estimated origin from parachute drop to submarine landing to infiltration by fishing boat. The reports quoted each other, later reports built on earlier ones. By the morning of June 6th, an SS intelligence summary had estimated the formation at battalion strength and assigned it a name, Das Geisterbataillon, the Ghost Battalion. Owen scrolled. There was a post-war Allied intelligence assessment dated 1946 attempting to identify the formation. It could not. No Allied unit corresponded to the German descriptions. The assessment concluded tentatively that the reports had been the result of German confusion combined with local resistance activity, exaggerated in the fog of the invasion. There was a follow-up study dated 1957 commissioned by NATO. It reached the same conclusion, with reservations. It noted in a footnote that the pattern of reported activity had clustered around a specific area of the Norman countryside, and that certain electromagnetic anomalies had been recorded in that area during the June 5th to June 6th window. The study recommended further monitoring. There was a construction record dated 1961. NATO had built a communications relay station at the location. The location matched, to within 20 metres, the coordinates of the collapsed shed in Guillaume Rousseau's farmyard. Owen stared at the record for a long time. Laurent stared at it beside him. "Major," Laurent said. "The station. Yes. This station. Yes. The station we came out of. Yes." Behind them, Armand said, "So we saved history?" Owen closed the file. He turned in his chair. He looked at Armand, who was standing in his muddy French peasant's coat in a laboratory in 2049, holding his hands loose at his sides, waiting for an answer. He looked at Petrov, who had already understood, and who was standing with his hands behind his back and his face composed. He looked at Laurent, who was still looking at the screen with the expression of a historian who had just discovered that he was, and had always been, a footnote in his own field. "No," Owen said, "we just joined it." The laboratory was quiet. Then Armand said, very softly, "Major, if we always did this, then I did not choose to cross the pathway. I only felt as though I had." Owen did not turn from the screen. "Callum was asked," he said. He answered, "That much I know." Armand nodded and went back to the bench and sat down. Somewhere behind Owen, on a second screen that had opened when Laurent had queried the database, a scanned document was displayed. An Allied intelligence memorandum dated June 11th, 1944. It described a report from a French resistance courier from the region south of Bayeux. The courier had reported that a small Allied commando team had operated in her sector in the final hours before the invasion, and that the team had included, among others, a British engineer who had died stopping an SS officer from turning a German armoured regiment onto the beaches. The courier's name on the memorandum was Madeleine Rousseau. The date was June 11th. Below her name, in a separate hand, someone had added a note in 1997 when the file was declassified. Rousseau, Monsieur continued resistance activity through the liberation of Bayeux. Post-war, schoolteacher, Bayeux. Married 1949, 2 children. Died Bayeux, 2011, aged 91. See also, Rousseau, nephew, raised in a household 1944 onward. French Army Signals Officer, retired 1989. Owen read the note. He read it again. He read it a third time. He put his hands flat on the console because his hands needed to be flat on something. Petrov had come to stand at his other shoulder. Petrov was reading the note too. Petrov didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "The boy made it." "The boy made it?" "French Army Signals." "Yes." "Sir, he learned that in a hayloft in one night." "He learned it," Owen said, "in a hayloft in one night." Petrov was silent for a beat. "Sir," he said, "I would like to note for the record that I have never been prouder of 2 hours of my life." Owen almost smiled. Behind him, Armand had walked over and was standing at Owen's shoulder, reading the note about Madeleine. Armand did not speak. After a while, Owen said, "She lived." "Yes, she lived, and I did not tell her." "You could not have told her, Major. You did not know." "I could have told her that in the history I remembered she lived. It would have cost me nothing." "You did not know if that was still true. You said so. Honestly." "Yes." "That is the answer she would have wanted." Owen looked at the note. "I know." He looked at it for another long moment. Then he closed the file and he stood up and he turned to face the room. The woman in the white coat was still standing where she had been. The man with the headset had lowered his microphone. Petrov was beside the console. Laurent was standing with his eyes on the floor. Armand was at Owen's shoulder. "We need," Owen said, looking at Laurent, "to write a letter." "Yes, Major." "And then I need to sleep." "Of course." "And then," he said, "I would like to talk to whoever is in charge of what happens next." The woman in the white coat looked at him. "Major," she said, "that would be you." Owen looked at her. He looked at the array behind her, blue and white lights winking down as the electromagnetic conditions that had made the pathway possible collapsed at that moment in a Norman cellar a century in the past and would not open again in the lifetime of any person now living. He looked at Armand beside him. He looked at Laurent, who had raised his eyes from the floor and was watching him with the steady, patient regard of a man who had already understood what the woman in the white coat had said, and had already understood the shape of what would be built on it. He looked past them at nothing, at a courtyard in a country that no longer existed in the form he had left it, at a young woman with a sten across her back who had lived to be 91 and had raised 2 children of her own, and a boy who was not hers, and had taught school in Bayeux, and had, at some point in a long life, perhaps in the small hours of some other morning a century after the one she had watched him disappear on, remembered him and wondered. Outside the laboratory windows, the sun of a September morning in 2049 was climbing over a country that had never quite been the one he remembered. Somewhere in that country, in a file room in a building that had been built on top of a cellar that had been built on top of a temporal pathway that had opened because a NATO investigation had recommended monitoring an area of unexplained electromagnetic activity in 1957, a young researcher was, at that exact moment, opening a folder marked Das Geisterbataillon and beginning, without knowing it, the work that would in due course produce the pathway that had, a night ago in one direction and 22 seconds ago in the other, opened a door in the world. Owen Kearney, who no longer knew how his war ended, and who had at last made his peace with not knowing, drew a long breath in a laboratory in a century that might or might not be the one he had been born into. Then, favouring his leg, he went to write the letter. End.